to order. It is 1:46 p.m. First item on the agenda is roll call.
Director McGorty?
Present.
Director Crane?
Present.
Director White?
Present.
Director Robinson?
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you.
Okay, first of all, order of business is Pledge of Allegiance. So, Al White, would you like to lead us?
I will, although I will use the original version, not the one that was brought forward by McCarthyism. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next on the item, or next on the list is consent items. First is approval of minutes from the July 8th, 2021 meeting.
Move approval. I'll second it. This is Al.
Okay, so it's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes. All those, do you want to do roll call on this, or should we just all those in favor?
You can, if you would like, actually move forward the consent calendar as one big thing with both items. You don't technically need to approve them separately unless you're pulling one of them for approval.
Okay, in that case, would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent items?
So moved. So seconded.
Okay, Nicole, do you want to do roll call or would you prefer? Okay, go ahead.
I can do roll.
Let's do a roll call.
All right, Director McGorty?
Yes.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Director White?
Yes.
Director Robinson?
Aye.
Motion carries unanimously.
Next on our agenda is discussion and appointment of a tribal stakeholder director. So in this, we're going to review the nomination of Eddie to the board. Eddie, are you on the call?
I know he was going to try to be on the call.
Yeah, I spoke with him yesterday. I know he's working right now, but he said he'd be listening in. I can reach out to him if need be.
We finally were able to get the votes we need to confirm the nomination. And I don't know if that it would be necessary that he's here to accept the position. I suppose maybe he should be.
I don't think he has to be. I think that it's a question of whether the board wants to approve the nomination.
This is Director Robinson. I move to approve the nomination.
I will second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the nomination of Eddie Navarez as a new board member. All those we'll go through a roll call vote, please, Nicole.
Director McGorty?
Yes.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Director White?
Yes.
Director Robinson? Director Robinson?
You're on mute, Zach.
Sorry about that. That's an aye, like I'm on a boat.
All right, thank you. Motion carries unanimously.
Okay, well, we'll welcome Director Navarez to the board in the future, and hopefully he will be here with us. So next on the agenda is confirm the Upper Russian River Water Agency Board of Directors appointment of member Director Ross LaRue to the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Agency Board of Directors.
I move to, this is Al, I move to confirm the appointment of Ross LaRue to the Board of Directors for the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Agency Board.
We have a second.
Yes, this is Zach. I'll second that.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to welcome Director Ross LaRue to the board. So may we have a roll call vote, please, Nicole?
Chair McGordy?
Yes.
Director Crane?
Aye.
Dr. White?
Yes.
Director Robinson?
Yes.
And Director Navarez is absent. Motion carries with Director Navarez absent.
Okay. Ross, welcome, and we look forward to you working along with us as we move through our tasks from meeting to meeting. Next is the discussion and possible adoption of recommendations from the Ukiah Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Financial Ad Hoc Committee meeting regarding funding for the implementation of the Groundwater Sustainability Plan and the annual operating costs. Who is going to present this?
This is Zach here. I'm going to present some language that we all agreed to, and then we can have a broader discussion about nuances and people's individual perspectives. So we have two conclusions that we came to, using the word conclusion lightly. So the committee's made some edits and changes to the draft budget, which we are forwarding back to the board for additional refinement. And on the second point, with regard to funding, the committee recommends a period of self-funding until a regulatory fee can be studied and implemented. Such a fee could be based on acreage for agricultural users and possibly hookups for other water users. We recommend spreading these fees across the broadest possible base. We recommend to avoid more complex fee scenarios where fees rise and fall annually. We also had an outstanding question. We wish to know how these fees can be applied to de minimis users. And when we have an opportunity, we want to address anyone who can speak authoritatively to that issue. With that said, and that's the consensus of the committee, there's still some work to be done on the budget, and there's still a lot of discussion to be had about our funding scenarios.
Michael, are you able to share the budget documents that are in the agenda packet?
Can you see that?
We can. Can you zoom it just a little bit?
Yeah.
Bring it up just a little bit more. That's good.
So this was a draft sort of 5-year working budget. It's not something that needs to be adopted by the board, but we needed to do it in order to determine what the costs would be for the first 5 years. And we went through several iterations of it. None of them really significantly changed the cost. So we're looking somewhere around this. We can definitely have more discussion about what's included. And after looking at several different funding mechanisms, really the only option that the ad hoc sees as viable is to go forward with member contributions until such a time that a fee can be implemented. And in order to do that, a fee study would need to be conducted that would need to be paid from member contributions.
So how was the budget developed? What were the
I got
the
vaccinated.
data that were inputted into it? Or in other words, what's the basis for the numbers we see here?
We did a pretty detailed calculation of the administrative needs. We got a quote from the Resource Conservation District for the monitoring costs. We got projected costs from our consultant from LWA for what they thought model maintenance might cost. I believe SCI, whether or not they were the ones doing the fee, thought that we should budget up to $100,000 for the fee study. So we pretty much, we put a lot of work into gathering costs from the source.
Say, Glenn?
Yes.
The next 3 pages kind of answer your question to a certain extent in the packet here.
I don't have the packet up, so if we can just go ahead and go down.
That's sort of the detail of how those numbers ended up there.
One of our challenges right now, and I should share this with the group, is we're close. We have a draft, but we don't really quite have the final details on what our plan looks like. So for example, on the monitoring costs, we really struggled going back and forth on what is it that the plan is actually saying we're going to do. And so getting a cost estimate when we're not quite sure what it is we're doing is a little bit tricky and leads to some ambiguity. We can either guess high or we could guess low when we're faced with that ambiguity. Another example of that is there's a lot of question on whether or not this entity will take an active role during the next 5 years in soliciting grants and administrating those grants, or whether we'll let partners do that. Another challenge that we had would be ambiguities on this funding study. And, we have a quote from a contractor who'd certainly like to get the bid for $100,000, but until we put that out to competitive bidding, we don't know what that's really going to cost us. So some of these issues are going to require additional input from Larry Walker to help us understand what we're signed up for our monitoring. Some of these issues will be decisions that the board is going to have to make about what level of activity we intend to maintain during the coming 5 years after our plan has been submitted.
Yeah, so I'm looking at it. Most things look reasonable. The $100,000 for the fee study seems a little high because it doesn't seem like we have that big a group of potential constituents in this. And what is the actual number? I guess it's hard to know because does it include all residents of Ukiah Valley and all wells, all commercial water users? I mean, these are the things that I guess possibly will be determined by the study.
That's exactly correct. The fee study would help to work out some of those issues.
And I know that Monterey has finally got their groundwater basin management plan in place, and they have a fee structure that they're charging, but they're quite different from us because there's so many more ag users, and they pump quite a bit more groundwater than we do, and they have other challenges compared to us. But at this point, I'm just kind of rambling a little bit. We have to go. I trust the ad hoc implicitly because I know that people involved are careful and professional, and they watch their money. So that's the only comments I have to make. Any other directors have issues?
Well, I'd like to comment, Crane. The de minimis component, learning that is certainly important for us because that helps inform us about who might be categorically excluded, if anybody. If our goal is to spread or across the broadest base to reduce the individual cost to a minimum, understanding what that base is important for us. Thank you.
Does anyone on the call have any recollection or any knowledge on this issue of whether or not we are allowed to apply fees to de minimis users? Amir, I'm wondering about you.
Hi, Zach. This is Amir. So I want to differ if SCI has anybody on the call. Could I be interested to participate on this? But based on our discussion with Amber and just reading, there's like a paragraph in Sigma Law that specifically says what to do with de minimis users. Not really clear, but basically there are two requirements for somebody to be de minimis, and that's pumping less than 2 acre-feet a year. And the use of the pumping should be domestic. So if it's a mixed use or anything other than that, I think we can, have an exception that they're not de minimis. In terms of applying fees to them, my understanding is, and that this should be verified, but my understanding is we cannot put fees on de minimis users unless they have been regulated prior to this. So, or we establish some sort of a regulation. So it's not a straightforward process. We can't just put the same fee on them that we put on everybody else. There is some requirement that I'm not 100% certain about. So that's why I'm thinking if anybody from SCI is on the call, that would be more helpful.
Hi, Amir. Hi, Zach. I can add a little bit to that as well. John regrets not being able to come today. He had another meeting he couldn't break. But Water Code 10730 is the part of Sigma that discusses regulatory fees. And as Amir said, you cannot place, it states there that you cannot place fees on de minimis users unless they've been regulated pursuant to this part. So one of the things that comes into play here is, from what we understand, I think with a regulatory fee, it becomes much more difficult legally to place a fee on a domestic user. I think it is true that a property-related fee, it's a lot easier to place a fee on a domestic user. Now that said, if you were to go with a methodology similar to what was discussed at the ad hoc, where you were putting a fee on water providers, they in turn could extend that cost to their customers. And so indirectly, in a sense, somebody who's a water customer would be paying into that. But with regulatory fees, it gets a little legally questionable to try to place a fee directly on a de minimis user.
Okay, well, that offers a lot of clarity.
Thanks, Ryan. That's helpful. It sounds like this is somewhat off the table for a regulatory fee.
Mm-hmm. To some degree, I think so, yeah.
Well, and let me point out that, so at the ad hoc, we did discuss the difference between regulatory fees and property-related fees, and decided that for the time being, because it's faster and simpler, the regulatory fee was the more appropriate way to go. But we did discuss that, once the plan is implemented and we get further down the road and we have a fee or a funding mechanism in place, that it's something that we could look at to do a property related fee, where I believe de minimis users could be charged.
In addition to that, if I may as well, for the nearer term, a regulatory fee may fit with what you need. Longer term, property related fees have more flexibility in what they can pay for. And so while I understand that a regulatory fee may be the best viable option for the near term, that's another reason why long term you may want to consider the possibility of a property related fee as well.
Ryan, do you understand also why the fee studies are so expensive?
Well, and this is something regretfully, John can speak to this better than I can. $100,000. I don't know if that's a number that covered more than the study itself, but typically a regulatory fee study, from what I understand, is closer to $50,000 to $60,000. But a property-related fee study is more expensive. It's more rigorous. For a regulatory fee, the language is you have to establish a fair and reasonable relationship between the fee and its use. Whereas a property-related fee, you have to establish a strong nexus between the fee and the use. And so it's more rigorous for a property-related fee. I would have to get in touch with John to confirm that number, but my guess is it would be a bit less than that for a regulatory fee.
And I think that the range that John gave us was something like 50 to 100 or 60 to 100. And we used 100, assuming worst case scenario, and hopefully including some of the work that is required to do inventories and things like that that would be needed in order to conduct a regulatory fee study.
Other questions or comments from board members?
I have a question. This is Al. So I heard it stated that you could use your regulatory fee on the providers, like the individual water districts, which would then they would be able to recover that through the rates to their ratepayers. So you wouldn't be dealing with all these individuals as far as de minimis or not de minimis and so forth. Is that true? And if it is, it seems like that would be a good way to go for the initial steps.
If I could speak to that, yes, that is true. And additionally, when you think about the administrative cost in terms of time and resources, especially when de minimis users would be paying such a small amount, it may not make sense if you were to have to conduct that yourself, if you were going to have to go through the process of collecting these small amounts from all these individuals. But if you were to place the fee on the water providers, either based on the water they're drawing or an estimated usage rate, something of that sort, then you kind of do away with the administrative cost of dealing with that as well.
Well, it certainly seems like a promising avenue from my point of view.
So Al, in the committee meeting, we talked that could look like a fee structure for water suppliers. So be that city of Ukiah or Willow or any of the water suppliers, perhaps based on well hookups, perhaps based on wellheads, just as long as we're avoiding meter readings that fluctuate annually. And as long as it was simple. The committee talked a lot about keeping any fee structure that we do relatively simple, then those were all good ideas.
And is this the kind of thing that would get explored in a fee study that we're talking about having someone do?
It would, yes.
Good.
Ryan, there was one other tangent we had that is going to be important at some moment, so let's just mention it right now. What happens if you have an ag user who's taking water out of a well somewhat close to the Russian River, and the jurisdiction for that water has been determined to be underflow? It is treated as surface water from a regulatory perspective. Would you imagine those people to be just categorically exempt, or is it gray, or have you had any experience with this?
That is gray. From my conversations with John, there's some gray area there, and that is another thing that the fee study would help to determine. That'd be real. Some of the real meat and potatoes of the fee study would have to be really digging into that, and whether you could establish a strong enough relationship there. So that there is a bit of gray area there, but I think there can be an argument made that the sustainable management of groundwater is beneficial to that user. We did discuss the possibility of having kind of a tiered system, but I know that there was also some feedback about that may become too complex. But there is, you're right, there's some gray area there that would have to be determined to move forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that gray area something that sort of exists in our whole surface water, groundwater interaction aspect, where at some point in time, a groundwater user might be depleting surface water, and at another point in time, a surface water user might be depleting groundwater? And wouldn't that bring even just surface water users into the fold as having an impact on groundwater?
I would agree with that. I think that's one of the reasons why there can be an argument made to charge such a person. the interconnectedness of surface and groundwater is definitely in play there. And again, that's something that would be a key element of a fee study if you were to implement one.
Amir, please correct me if I'm wrong here, but when we model our system here, the model does not care about the jurisdictional source of a molecule of water. If it's taken out of the wellhead, we consider it for our modeling purposes to be groundwater, and if it and that's that. Whether or not it actually started in the river and flowed underneath, it doesn't matter. Am I correct?
You are correct. We put it as a well and in the medium term to long term. And when I say medium, it doesn't mean really long-term medium. It's like short, medium term. The model would estimate whatever impact that has if we model it as a well or a diversion from the surface water. So within a day or two, that might be a different scenario for the model, but more than 2-3 days, 2-3 search periods, the model doesn't care whatever we do with that diversion. Either we model it as a well or a surface water diversion. As if I remember correctly, Zach, because we had the discussion, I think, and Ryan, please correct me. I think one of the things that would kind of make a regulatory fee eligible is going with the argument that the groundwater management would be something that everybody benefits, because otherwise I don't think it would be easy to go the regulatory fee way and charge all the domestic users or connections to the city. So if they are going with that argument, then the surface flow wells would also fall into that argument because it benefits the whole basin. So if you are going to extend this to the largest population, I think we're going to use that argument, and that argument would involve even the underflow wells.
Other director questions? So shall we open this up for public comment? Devin.
Yes, hi. Several questions here. And I guess, the note that I just wrote down is I think it might be in our best interest here at Farm Bureau, maybe to put a comment letter together with several of our questions related to how this financial process may move forward, especially sort of with this bigger conversation that's morphed into, it sounds like this is ultimately going to be just a water benefit fee if we're not segmenting out surface water versus groundwater. That's a bit of a challenge, I think, in many ways, like we've discussed. Inland Water and Power Commission last night had a fairly thorough conversation regarding moving forward with looking for fee assessment analysis on their aspect too, related to the Potter Valley project. I think there's got to be a lot of duplicative action going on concurrently, which is my concern. So I think there needs to be some significant organization in terms of the timing related to any sort of fee proposal. And that, I guess, is the one question that I wanted to bring back to, is that looking at what's been provided here today, year one is slated to run through June 30th of 2022. So we're already past, less than a year and looking at that initial timeline. So for the first $100,000 for a fee study, and maybe less, what is sort of the deadline? Are we looking at having something in preparation for June 30th of 2022? It would be good to kind of have a better synopsis from the fee administration perspective and what that process looks like to go through, the various jurisdictional entities that we've discussed, whether that's the city of Ukiah, water districts, what may be it. I don't have a clear perspective yet in terms of what that looks like. So that's just, one general statement. In terms of some of the administrative costs, I guess a couple of questions that we had was looking at year one and year two, there's a jump from $25,000 to $46,000, and we weren't sure what the rationale for that was. And in the draft GSA administrative breakdown, we weren't really sure sort of where that reimbursement was going. Is this, so far the county has been generous enough in providing, staff assistance, through the county. Is this just a reimbursement process that the county would be seeking for existing staffing? So what is sort of the premise of that administrative cost? I'd appreciate an answer to that. And then I do have a follow-up question if possible.
If I may, I can respond to a lot of the questions that you have. One is that the timeline for a regulatory fee, we're looking more like 2 to 3 years out. It's not something that would happen in the next, say, 6 months, because we would need to do an RFP for a fee study. We would need to do the fee study, and then there's a process involved to implement a regulatory fee. And that would also involve public hearings where there would be a chance to comment. In terms of the administrative costs, the jump from year 1 to 2 is because the year 1 there only really reflects from the time the GSP is submitted to June 30th. So that's about a half a year. So we reduced the year 1 costs. And it hasn't been brought to the board for discussion yet. And, our plan is to do that soon, but we do need to look at the administration going forward and how that's going to look. And my recommendation is going to be to do some sort of RFP for administration of the GSA. So that'll be a conversation soon. Probably at the next meeting. And the cost, we tried to take that into account when looking at what the cost would be going forward.
Okay, that was very helpful. Thank you. And maybe my one last question that I was going to ask about had to do with, I noticed that, in the comment letter that was submitted, as well as sort of in the monitoring budget, there were some conversations about, overlap with CASGEM, which I understand, but I wasn't sure if there could be an explanation over how the funding mechanisms for CASGEM to date have related to Sigma or not. I thought there was sort of some separation there in funding mechanisms. And this might be a question for either the RCD or Laurel. There was a mention of putting in some surface water monitoring equipment, and as far as I recall, I wasn't sure sort of what the goal was with that process, where those would be put, what the QA QC looks like on those, etc. So appreciate that.
I can speak to that, to the CASGEM question. So for basins that are subject to Sigma, the CASGEM requirement will be going away. So we're keeping a subset of those wells that are useful to our data collection purposes, and we'll continue to monitor. Those will be migrated to the new Sigma system. So there won't be overlap between the two programs because the CASGEM requirement is going away, where Sigma takes over.
Hey, Laurel, you have a question or comment?
Yeah, you might remember a number of months ago came to you and presented the Department of Conservation grant that we were proposing on, and you endorsed it and sent a letter of support. Since then, I gave a presentation on the Department of Conservation grant that funds stream gauge monitoring. So I'm sort of surprised to see a budget that's for a different agency to do what we're already doing. So I'm wondering if you could explain that.
I can explain that, and then I'll let anyone else who wants to jump in too. We didn't quite get it correct, Laurel, when we asked the Mendocino County Resource Conservation District to go after a certain set of tasks. And what I mean by that is we didn't have the tasks very well defined. We didn't have drafts of the chapters in our hands yet. So what you're looking at on the screen right now, that will be something that needs to be rebuilt. Some of this work you're already contracted to do, if I'm not mistaken. CLSI is contracted to do. And some of this work is going to need to be done by someone, and I would consider CLSI to be as good a choice as any. So we were interested in seeing kind of what a bottom line number looks like, but this is not a quote that we're going to move forward with right now.
Well, for budgeting purposes, you're way underestimating stream gauge monitoring, and you really should ask an entity that knows how to do that. The well monitoring is a very simple task. Unless you drop the sensors into the well, you don't replace equipment all the time. And it's very simple. Stream gauge monitoring is expensive and difficult. So if you underestimate the cost, you'll run into a problem, just so you know.
No, that's super helpful. That's going to be part of item D in our agenda today, as we kind of identify what it is we're on the hook for the 5-year. And both you and Sean White pointed out that gauging stream flow, that's $50,000 a year per.
Oh, well, the USGS charges for their gauges, just for maintenance, about $30,000 a year. They charge about that much to install them as well. Yeah. And I would think you would want these to be gauged to the level of that quality control. And Mike luckily is on the call, and he could speak to that too.
But before we go too far down that direction, it's not clear that any of this is currently required under our 5-year plan.
Oh,
so
I see.
We're going to try to separate out what's on a wish list and what's on the to-do list.
Okay, so does that happen? I mean, we're doing this now. We're doing the two gauge, we're doing a lot of gauges actually. And we'll be doing that through May 2024. Okay, so that's what the grant funds, just so you know.
What other items on this spreadsheet on our screen right now, Laurel, are you guys currently covering right now, or is it mostly that stream gauge monitoring?
Well, we have in our contract with Larry Walker doing some groundwater monitoring, and we have free of charge done continuous groundwater monitoring, which is a great improvement over the CASGEM. And again, I don't know which you'd have to do, right? Continuous is really a record that you can use for the different kinds of models that you're running. CASGEM is very, very limited data. So we have some funding for, and it's not clear here if this is continuous or, you're just doing the 2 readings a year. I don't see that it specifies. 4 times, it looks like this might be 4 times a year? 4 times 26 wells?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, really, this should be put together for continuous well monitoring. And Amir, I'm sure you could comment on that, but fewer wells, maybe more data.
Yeah, I can't really comment on the budget, but I talked to Deborah before putting this together, and I tried to explain. So about the stream flow gauges, we have one installed that CLSI currently is doing flow measurement, so that one needs to be continued. We are installing a second one before the implementation, so we will have 2 at least to do a maintenance when the implementation starts, and we are pretty sure we're going to need a 3rd one at least. So that 3rd one is not installed. It's not going to be installed during the planning. It's going to be installed during implementation. So as long as the budget is for 2+, it can be reliable, but there is at the minimum 2 gauges that need to be maintained by the GSA. In terms of groundwater elevations, I think I see one line in the budget that says equipment maintenance fund for LWA. I think that's for those continuous gauges if they break or something. But we do have, I have to get the number correct, but if I'm guessing right, it's like 8 continuous measurements right now, including TSS wells, the ones that DWR is drilling. I don't think Deborah included those in the budget. Those may need travel time just to make sure that the equipment is calibrated or if it doesn't work. Otherwise, they don't have a cost unless you want to replace them or do calibration on them. But we do have wells in the monitoring network that will be continued to be monitored manually via CASGEM. And the ideal would be quarterly. We might be able to do a minimum of 2 samples per year. But what we have in the GSP now is 2. So 4 would be great. but that might be able to be shrinked to 2 times per year. What we wanted to do was to have more continuous devices. Those are complicated. We don't have enough budget right now. So if we want to do that, then that budget should be considered in the implementation. And that has a lot of coordination budget too, to get the access agreements and everything. So it's not going to be low, at least for the installation, probably lower than we go to the operation. The only other comment that I have is water quality monitoring. I think during the ad hoc meeting, what Zach said was correct. So some of these monitoring would be done by the entities, would not have a cost for the GSA, and that's how we designed it to lower the cost. But there are samples that the GSA needs to pay for or needs to do. And I think that's a part that can be adjusted in the RCD budget. Overall, I think we guessed something between 40 to 60,000 in our first evaluation by that John Bliss shared. This is not very far off, but basically that's what we're looking at.
Amir, the big ticket item there is stream flow gauging. And it's my understanding that all you really need is stage. And with that, you can calculate your fluxes in and out of the aquifer from the surface water. And that actually gauging the stream flow, in other words, the flow going past that station, is a luxury that could also be helpful, but is not essential for your modeling requirements. Am I correct or mistaken in that?
You're not mistaken, but I would argue that we need the flow. Right, according to Laura, how USGS does it is basically how we want to do it. So we need to do flow measurements based on stage to estimate the flow. Now, this is for 2 reasons. First of all, if you want to do a stage and use it in the model, we need to do a very detailed survey of the profile of the river. And that needs to be done repeatedly because that profile might change. So that also has a cost that might be comparable to doing the flow measurements. The second one is if we do a stage, then we are completely relying on the model for any of the SMC. But if you do a flow measurement, then we can use that directly to counter some of the uncertainty in the model, because we do have the actual estimation of the flow in these rivers that is not calculated by the model. So that's just what I think. I think it's better to do the flow measurements. So when I talked to Barry from CLSI, we tried to pick locations that the profile seems more stable. So in the first couple of years, maybe more trips are necessary to do flow measurements, but those can be limited in the years after to 5 or even less. But I would suggest the GSA pursue normal flow measurements for these gauges.
Laurel, do we have other locations in the basin where we already have flow measurements being done by you or USGS that would be close enough to these locations that they would be suitable proxies?
Proxies for the 2 sigma gauges, you mean?
Yeah, I just don't understand why we would do rating curves for a flow location that's a mile downstream of the Talmadge Bridge when the USGS already has an excellent flow rating right there. Why would we
Well,
redo
I
it?
think the 2 gauges are in Redwood Valley where there isn't adequate USGS coverage. At least that's where we're putting them.
Downstream of the Talmadge Bridge, right, Amir?
The 2 gauges that we have, one is on Russian River. It's not yet installed in Redwood Valley. The other one is on Forsyth Creek, again in Redwood Valley.
Yeah, we aren't putting one in below Talmadge gauge. Maybe somebody else is, but we aren't.
One of our transects for our monitoring, I think.
Oh, maybe
You're
for
correct.
wells? Could it be wells there?
Well, there'll be a set of wells plus the stream gauge.
Yeah.
Zach, you're correct about the transit, but we are using the USGS gauge there. We are not installing the new one. So we will have wells drilled around it, but we're going to use the flow measurement from USGS for that transit.
Okay, so that's good news. And then on the Forsyth Creek, there's nothing nearby that you feel would be an adequate proxy?
No.
Okay.
There's a USGS gauge on the West Fork, but it's almost to the forks, right? So that's not going to give us Forsyth, and then we're looking at one quite a bit upstream from the current gauge. So I don't think that a discharge measurement done at the current gauge could just be picked up and used at the other one. They're all very site specific. So you could get all sorts of error if you did that.
Okay, well, moving on. So Deborah, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes. So I just wanted to address something that was said earlier, just in terms of how we develop this budget. As Amir said, I talked to him to get some information about some of the costs. And Laurel, I want you to know that I said in my email when I sent this that we may not, the RCD is not necessarily the right entity to just do the stream gauge monitoring. We were asked to come up with a budget. We did our best based on the, as Zach said, incomplete information. But we were just trying to come up with a number, and I agree with you. Your entity might be the more appropriate one to do it. And I think there were questions about, travel time, et cetera. But I just wanted to put that out there. And then as far as the groundwater elevation monitoring, again, looking forward to what this is going to look like and how much time will be required. There's a certain amount of unknown because there's some new elements to this. There may be new need for new landowner access agreements. I don't know yet. So I was trying to create a budget that was robust, that would encompass all those things. And I won't know until we get a little closer what exactly that was going to be. So that's why how the budget came out the way it did. It was my best estimate based on what I knew, and it may end up being different than that. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Deborah. So Michael Webster.
Yes, there was a lot of stuff to cover there. One of the reasons USGS is so costly is that because they, besides just doing the stream gauging, they're doing R&D work. They have a huge facility in Bay St. Louis at the Stennis Space Center that does a lot of the testing and things of that nature. Plus, you have an overhead that is quite robust in Washington, D.C. And it just is because of those reasons, you almost have to double the cost of what it does to actually do a gauge. But then again, people who are doing that kind of work usually get their information on how to do it by USGS. And as such, there's that aspect of it. On the monetary side of doing it, if you look at half the cost, that's probably what someone with some sophistication would do it. If you're looking at me, where all I have is a pygmy meter, it would be a matter of how much time it took to do it. And for the most part, I think the most I've charged for a full range gauge is about $7,000, $8,000. And then on the lower side of it, on a year like this, it would be maybe $4,000. But the difference, the utilities they have for just computing discharge and processing and posting it on the web on a near real-time basis, that's what costs. So that's about all I had to offer on that.
Okay, Beth.
Thank you. So just to kind of step back and look at the larger scope of the budget. The budget exploration was an exercise to help the funding ad hoc committee establish a recommendation for the GSA funding mechanism, right? Like the methodology for funding it that would be included in the GSP itself, so that Emir can write it up. But also so that the member agencies could go back to their boards and establish, if it's going to be a member contribution, moving forward with budgetary issues. The annual budget for the GSA and the really specifics on all the various elements are, as has been mentioned today, going to be finalized as the GSP comes into its final form. And then the GSA operating budget will be addressed on an annual basis, just like any of our agencies have an annual budget. So I think the really important thing here is, yes, there is some overestimating, some underestimating, but we did come up with an annual average that I will say, please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who's part of the ad hoc, we all felt pretty comfortable with like a 275,000 annual average for the first 5 years, knowing that would be suggesting that or recommending it would be member contributions to begin, and if approved, the fee study was approved, moving in towards a regulatory fee, most likely, it's some part in that first 5 years. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, do you still have a question, or you just have your hand up?
Sorry about that. I'll take it down.
No problem. Devin, question, comment?
Yeah, just a quick, I guess, question, and it's kind of come up. I'm just wondering, in terms of, if we're looking at, $70,000 roughly for, member agencies. I mean, I do think that there are ways where the tribal seed and the ag seed can, contribute, maybe not monetarily, but through what may be it. But I guess the question that I have is ultimately, as part of this fee structure, we're going to have, we've talked about some duplicative sort of potentials for fees on the urban side, but I'm thinking the same is going to be applicable on the ag side. Because if you've got double, contract holders like the flood control, for example, who are getting a fee or some sort of assessment through the flood control, and then they're being asked to pay a separate fee independent of that. I mean, there needs to be some of these conversations. And I would also like, again, I think a really key point in all of this is looking at the bigger picture of this watershed. If Sigma is sort of morphing into looking at surface water more than just groundwater, and I think that all the other surface water projects will be doing the same, I'm just seeing a lot of resistance if we have 5 different sort of fees coming at, the same basis of payment. And so I think there needs to be the continued discussion of the timing and collaboration for how this moves forward. And maybe it's just, some sort of a general water assessment that is divvied up amongst those entities. But, asking folks to pay 3 to 4 different sets of fees or taxes or whatever may be it is going to be complicated. And I think you'll get resistance to that.
Beth, do you have something to add?
Yeah, and Devin, those are great points. And I agree, and I think many others do as well. These were points that were touched upon in the discussions in the ad hoc committee for the funding. And I would also like to second what Amber said earlier, is that the administration of the GSA was taken on by the county, but it was always meant to be a temporary thing to get us to the groundwater sustainability plan development. And I think, working with Amber and some of the other team, the plan is to come back to the board with a proposed RFP for GSA administration. And then I think this GSA really deserves to have a team dedicated to doing this very thing. So they would be leading the fee study, managing the consultants, moving forward with all of that. And that would be the team or the person that would bring all of this together and guide us forward. I think it feels to me like we're a bit splashing around in a tiny little puddle here trying to figure things out, but I think this will all become clear as we move forward.
Well, there's certainly a lot of unknowns, and hopefully we've picked up some new ideas, such as the actual cost of stream gauges. And, I think you're right, Beth. The county has been kind of doing this as a placeholder, but this could certainly stand on its own in terms of administration. So this is something that to be determined in the future. So I guess at this point is there any other public comment? Go ahead, Amber.
I want to echo Beth made a comment earlier that pretty much echoed my thoughts exactly, that this budget was really for planning purposes, and it's not any budget that needs to be adopted by the board. It was to give us an idea of what we need to fund. So I do think that it's probably not perfect. We tried to take into account any expense that might possibly need to be covered. Maybe some places we under budgeted, but I also think some places we budgeted on the high side. So, as Beth mentioned, every year a detailed budget's going to be developed and adopted by the board. And so this is really for planning purposes. So I don't know that we need to pick it apart in such finite detail at this point. We just wanted to make sure that when we go forward with getting a commitment for member contributions, and then later with the fee study, that we have an idea of how much we're looking at and how much we need to be able to fund. And then the other part of this that we haven't talked a lot about is that, in order to go forward with this plan, we need all the directors to go back to their own boards and get a commitment for the next. Really, I think for the GSP purposes, we need a commitment for 5 years with the understanding or the caveat that will be eliminated if and when a fee is implemented.
I agree.
I as well, although rather than saying 5 years, I would think it would be until it's implemented. Maybe it's a 5-year minimum unless something supersedes it. I don't think we want to turn it off at 5 years if we don't have things put together to fund it another way.
Good point, Doug.
I have another question. Since the GSA is primarily interested in groundwater, what does stream flow have to do with groundwater? Wouldn't water level at various places be an adequate indicator relating to groundwater? Why do we care how much water goes by, which is the function of flow? Somebody could help me out with that.
Amir, do you want to field that question?
Sure. There are multiple things that the surface flow actually helps us. So the first and the foremost is one of the undesirable results that we're dealing with in Ukiah is the depletion of surface water bodies due to groundwater elevation decline. That's the official term of it. So we are monitoring groundwater elevation and trying to expand that monitoring network during the implementation. But what helps us address that undesirable result is comparing the elevations with the flow, because we have to have a measure of how much depletion is associated with how much groundwater elevation decline in different localities of the basin. So that's the first part that we need to address, and that's basically one of the 2 or 3 main concerns in the Ukiah Valley Basin that we need to address in the GSP. But other than that, a lot of the budget of the groundwater comes from a stream bed recharge. So that flow helps us calculate the recharge to the groundwater aquifer. Also, a lot of groundwater discharge happens to be and landed on the surface water part. So that also needs to be calculated, and one point of calibration would be using those surface flows that we are measuring in those gauges. So since Ukiah Valley Basin is basically a precipitation dependent basin, we need to have a good idea of surface flow processes, including precipitation and flows in the rivers. So that's why we're doing these gauges. I don't know if I answered your question completely, but I'm here to expand on it.
Didn't answer the question at all for me. If part of the stream flow is above the gravel and part of it's below, stream flow typically, as I understand it, is what's passing in the channel above the physical bottom of the gravel, so to speak.
Right.
Recharge, I don't think it cares if the water is standing there as a pool or if it's flowing by at a very rapid pace. Water level is water level. And recharge is a function in this part of the world, I believe, of what is the water level in relation to that particular point, which determines or is related to how much water can come out of the channel and go into the ground. I think about the concrete rubble dam at Norgard on the west side of the river, just north of the city sewer treatment plant, which, as I understand it, was installed there in order to raise the water level, in order to increase recharge of groundwater for the Willow Well located there. So I'm not understanding what flow has to do with the information I think we need.
So let me answer it this way. So about that undesirable result, I need to address the depletion of surface water bodies. A couple of things we need to calculate. So one is the amount of depletion. Basically, there is this amount of flow, for example, during the summer in the Russian River. How much of it, or how much of the depletion that we think is happening because of groundwater decline? So to get an estimate of that, we need a good measurement of flow. If we don't know the flow in the river, there is no way we can calculate depletion of the flow. So that's one thing that we need to get out of the surface flows. The other thing about the recharge always depends on soil properties and also the head of the water in the stream bed. So the larger elevation and the larger of the volume, the energy that you have, basically the larger of recharge you will have in the same soil. So again, if you want to calculate that correctly, we need the surface flow of that. So I can go on about why we need surface flow for the modeling purposes, but in terms of sigma, since you asked, although sigma is about groundwater, but since it has the undesirable result for depletion of surface water bodies, there is no way for us to calculate that depletion of surface flows without knowing the actual flow. We have to have a baseline of the flow so we can calculate how much it was depleted due to groundwater decline. So that's the most straightforward application of strain gauges in sigma.
I thank you for the explanation, but I'm still going to wrestle with this later. Thank you.
Perhaps you can take that discussion offline and Doug reached some kind of a good conclusion and understanding. So we have another question from Beth.
So Amber, back to your point about today. There you are, I can't see you. So what you're asking the GSA board today, I'm just trying to clarify, is it a commitment for the commitment to member contributions and a commitment to conduct a fee study? Or something like, you're on mute, or something like that.
So I don't think that the board can commit to member contributions at this point. I think that maybe direction needs to be given by the board to the board to go back to their respective boards to get commitment. But I think that if the board is in agreement with this sort of path of moving forward, they could adopt the recommendations of the ad hoc, which would include going back to their boards to get commitment. And then maybe at the next meeting, we could hear reports back on that.
I have a comment. If there was a letter from this body that each of us could take to our bodies that states the amount that's being requested, I think that would be more valuable for putting in an agenda than our orally transmitting this.
I think that's an excellent idea. Amber, can you put that together?
Yeah, if you want to give staff direction for me to write a letter and provide it to all the directors, I can do that.
Okay. Yes, I believe that's what would be best. So we'll give you direction to have a written communication on our budget and what so that our constituents can have an understanding of what they're committing to and what's going to be necessary over the next 5 years. I also want to publicly recognize the ad hoc committee for their very good work. I know that this is, while there's still some things that aren't, completely known, at least we have a much clearer picture of what to expect. Okay. Do we need any other action on this item before we move on to the next one?
Nicole, what are your thoughts? Do you think staff direction is enough, or do you think they should adopt the recommended action?
I can write it as by order of the chair to create that letter that you've been directed to create, and the order of the chair could summarize that, I think.
Okay, perfect.
What the direction of the board is to go along with those recommendations. I'll just include that in the chair's direction if that is all right with the chair.
Okay, that sounds good to me.
Glenn, is that all right with you?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so item D, moving on, would be the discussion on the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency's activity and role during the 5-year monitoring period. Who is going to report on this?
Something that I asked to get put on the agenda. We're close to sending our plan to the state and entering something of a new ground where we have a 5-year period where we're supposed to do our monitoring before we submit our next big plan. And there's definitely some very different visions about what this group should be doing during this 5-year period. From my perspective, our basin has a surface water problem. We don't have a groundwater problem. We're a medium priority basin, and we got thrown into this lot because of our population, and also because we got a couple ding points put against us for an unknown reason. And if anyone wants to go back and look at those original ratings on why we're doing all this, I can share that with you. So I am wondering if it is not most appropriate for us to go into a semi-hibernation. We have no evidence of a sustainability problem, having spent $1.5 million over the last 3 or 4 years. And we're going to go into a monitoring period now where we're going to collect a bunch more data, and that's great. That's what we said we're going to do. But I don't see any reason that the board needs to be getting together any more than once a quarter. I would propose that the TAC get together once a year to look at the new monitoring information. I would propose that someone perform our admin functions, something on the order of 10 hours a month, maybe to reply to emails. I would propose that this board not be actively involved in soliciting grants. We've served our purpose by creating the backup that these agencies need with our chapter 4 of our plan saying what all of these great management actions would be fantastic for our aquifer. But let's let the other folks go out, get these grants with support from us, but not with active engagement from us. And I think if you talk to some of who our partners would be, City of Ukiah, CLSI, RCD, some of them will point out that they don't want us to be involved in this. They want their help, our help in securing the grants, and they want our support, but then we've been asked to get out of the way. And the reason I put forward this somewhat radical proposal of going into hibernation is simple. When I look around at the people on this Zoom call here, this is our A team. And if we're not out there fighting the battles on surface water and really getting that sorted out, it's not good for us. And the more time we spend on groundwater, the more we're distracted from the really important issue in Mendocino County, or at least in this basin. So I invite other members of the board to share their vision about what we should be doing over the next 5 years, and maybe we can come to some sort of a consensus.
Zach, thank you for your thoughtful analysis. Would anybody else care to weigh in?
I'll put in 2 cents. This is Al. So, Zach, one of the things that I've been told got us in this wasn't just our population, but it was our lack of data to demonstrate that we don't have a groundwater problem. So, you know, I would love to meet quarterly. Everything you said would be great with me, as long as one, we have a GSP that's solid and gets accepted by the water boards, and the other is that we have a pretty active and timely gathering of data over the next, well, immediately going forward as soon as we can, to build this data bank that will demonstrate that we don't have a problem. So if those 2 things are covered, then yeah, I'm ready to go into hibernation.
Anyone else?
Yes, Crane. The hibernation as soon as practical, and this is in part echoing what Director White said. After we have satisfied the initial requirements of establishment. Until then, we need to continue the dialogue and sort through some more stuff, I think. And then the other piece of it is, if this body is to be supportive of agencies who want assistance or recommendations for projects that they propose, what's the mechanism for us granting that? Do we tentatively schedule 4 meetings a year, and if there's nothing, then we don't have the meeting, or what other mechanisms? Thank you.
We heard from all of our board members. As someone who goes to a lot of meetings, I'm all for reducing meetings, and it's all predicated on, have we met the intent and the requirements of the legislation that created the Groundwater Sustainability Agency legislation. And you know, there's calibration of our model, of course, is the most important thing, which means data gathering, which means that we consistently have to have someone taking the lead on that and making sure it gets done. And I guess the other question is, for the future of the agency, is it our intent for it to reside within Mendocino County, or do you see it going independent, or how would you like that to be? It seems like a nice fit for, if we're going to resurrect the Mendocino County Water Agency, which all indications are that we are going to do that, it seems to fit within the mission of what an agency like that would do.
I agree.
So.
Yeah, I also think that would be a place where, to Devin's point earlier, where the concern was that multiple entities are doing overlapping things that all end up costing money in multiple ways. You know, having that agency sort of be the clearinghouse for what everybody else has got going would enable, I think, a certain amount of coordination. And you know, if you're doing that, you can share with us, and if we're doing this, we'll share with you, and that type of thing. So yeah, I think that's a good proposal.
And looking into the future, the other thing that I know is going to end up costing us is probably both the Potter Valley project and potentially raising the Coyote Valley Dam. And who knows what those fees are going to be, but every time that I have a conversation, my heart starts to sink, because the studies are going to be massive for that. And, you know, we were we had some discussion last night at the Inland Water Power Commission about hiring a consultant to get ready to see if we can put a ballot initiative up, because there's going to be money we have to pay for matches on studies and other activities we're going to need to move forward on these projects. So, water is going to get kind of expensive. I hate to say it, but we've been coasting along here very favorably in Mendocino County, very low cost water. I think what we pay compared to what San Diego pays, I think they're right around $2,000 an acre foot now. So, we're fortunate to be where we are, but we've also have a lot of deferred maintenance, obviously, in our water infrastructure. And there's nothing like a drought to really bring that in your face. And we're not alone, believe me, as far as communities go. We'll maybe talk a little bit more about that under director reports, but I think it's good to have this discussion and to think about what's going to happen. And I think we all favor the idea that we're going through a real burst of creativity and hard work right now, but our hope is that in the future that it gets into a quieter period where it's mostly maintenance of our equipment and our modeling efforts and adjusting things to make those more accurate. So, Amber, you have your hand up.
I do, thank you. I'm noticing that we have Dominic Gutierrez here from DWR, and I'm wondering if he has any insight into taking that route of sort of going into hibernation mode, if he's seen that happen other places, or if that's something DWR would even approve, or just if he has any sort of insight into that.
Yeah, so I guess long or short answer is I don't have any insight. I haven't heard of any other agencies doing something similar. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. And obviously, once you submit your plan, you get the full powers under SGMA and can start implementing it. And then we have our 2-year period to review it. Yeah, I'd be kind of hesitant to weigh in too much on that, because I think that's somewhat like a legal issue. And I think what we're concerned with is, do you have a plan that passes our review? And then if it does, are you following that plan? And I mean, what I've heard so far is that you have all stated that you intend to follow your plan. I don't know if I would be the most qualified to state whether or not this proposal would or would not do that. What I can certainly do is talk to some people in the department and see if they have any insight or guidance they can provide that might help this kind of discussion in the future. But I think that's kind of like the extent of what I could answer on this. Hopefully that's helpful.
Dominic,
yeah.
I think part of this is potentially semantics. I think it boils down to what is required as a minimum for being prepared to have meetings when there is something for us to meet about. I'm speaking to the concept that I believe Zach spoke to, which is, if we don't have business to do, let's not have meetings. If we have business to do, then we need the meetings to be timely to accomplish those things we're supposed to. And I took his remark as, once the thing is up and running, then we need to be in a position to be in contact to deal with whatever issues come up. And hibernation was, in my view, a shorthand for that concept. So I don't know that we would want to ask the question, guys, is it okay if we just go to sleep for all winter?
Perhaps I should choose a different word then, but Doug is on the exact correct course there. We have a plan that lays out all the things we're going to do, but there's a lot of discussion about what we're going to do in addition to that. And
right,
so
and
I'm sorry.
go
Go ahead, Dominic.
I was just going to say, just to be clear, like we've been, in my role as a point of contact, been given really clear direction from our legal team not to in any way ever say anything that would give the impression that we are giving pre-approval or non-approval of a plan. And that's why I'm kind of being cagey with my language. I totally get what you're saying, that, you know, as things are needed to be dealt with according to your plan, you would deal with them. I just was offering, if you'd like, I can go and ask other people in the department if there are other examples of GSAs that have operated in this fashion, and if they see any issues that we should give you kind of a warning about or a heads up about. So I'm hoping that my comments weren't intended to be judgmental of the language you used or anything like that. I'm totally understanding what you're saying. I'm not having like alarm bells or something. It's more like if there's been times like this in other meetings where there's been kind of thorny issues, and I've been able to facilitate meetings with some of our, like legal experts or technical experts just to get answers. But I couldn't give you an answer immediately in this meeting, if that makes sense. So, and if you don't want me to do that, that's fine too. I'm just trying to see if I could maybe provide some additional help.
I support the request.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll follow up on that, and I'll be in touch, I guess, with Amber with what I find out, and trying to set up a meeting to see if we can find other examples.
I don't know what the question would be at this point. The only people who have submitted their plans are all the highest severity basins. Everyone who's in our cohort hasn't even submitted plans yet. And we're not asking to do anything different than what is 100% spelled out in the plan that we have in draft and will get submitted in the near future. So I'm not sure what the question would be.
Well, let me give you a quick summary. Based on what we're seeing in our plan, it's a little different than someone who's got serious deficiencies or problems with groundwater overdraft. So I think there's a little bit of confidence on our part that we're not going to have to do a lot of extensive management and mitigation to improve our groundwater levels. We're fortunate that we're in a basin that seems to be pretty balanced, and based on review of our model and plan, we're making some assumptions that things are going to go well, and we won't need a lot of active management in the next 5-year period. Is that correct, Zach? Is that what you're thinking?
Thank you, Glenn.
Okay. Does anybody else want to weigh in on this? Any members of the public? Beth.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a very interesting discussion. So in summary, what I'm hearing is we need to develop a plan. Then we need to develop a budget that supports that plan. Then we need to follow the plan. And then we need to report on the actions. And we need to do all of that in a way that the DWR will find acceptable and to the level of involvement that they are expecting from us. In the meantime, we can watch comments that are coming back to the other GSAs in our core cohort, as Zach mentioned. We can also watch the ones in the previous group that might give us some indication of what the DWR is looking for. I think I've learned a lot from watching those, and also from paying attention to what other GSAs are developing that are in our cohort right now. The grant writing aspect that Zach brought up earlier, and Amber and Amir, if you might have more information on this. I believe recently the grant eligibility, or the what we can use grant funds for, expanded to monitoring and administration. And that's something, if that is true, I think this GSA really needs to jump on that, because it could then reduce the amount of member contributions that were needed in order to fund even the most basic of the monitoring, data collection, and administration. So Amber and or Amir, do you have any memory or feedback on that?
Are you talking about the next round of funding that's going to come out early next year?
I think that's what I'm talking about, yeah. I've lost track of all the grants and everything and all the different agencies.
I don't know the details on that yet.
It was Laura, I think it was Laura who originally told me about that, but Amir, so she's not here. I was figuring Amir might know.
Or it's possible Dominic might have some.
Yeah, that's true. Dominic might know.
Yeah, I would defer to Dominic, but that's our understanding that monitoring can be covered by the grant.
Dominic, do you have any comments?
I'm checking our most recent update on grants because to be completely honest, I just got back from a long vacation, so I hadn't heard that update. Let me double check, and then I'll raise my hand once I have the answer for you, if that's okay.
That sounds good. Devin? Go ahead.
Can I just follow up with that real quick? Is that it's not necessarily we need an answer right this second. It's just that, to Zach's point, I think that, my impression talking to staff and consultants has not been that we are going to do grant writing to cover all of these big projects in the first 5 years if they're not deemed necessary. If something really great comes along, we could do it in coordination with one of the member agencies or another community, stakeholder agency like RCD or CLSI. But I don't want to just, it would be disappointing to see the GSA sort of say, no, we're not going to do any grant writing and then miss out on something like this that could really cut back on the member contributions. But it's not something that needs to be answered right now. It's just a consideration for the board members. Thank you.
Devin.
Yes, thank you. I guess really this keeps coming back to the keep it simple concept, right? This is something we have reiterated as much as possible, since the beginning of this conversation 5 years ago. Obviously we've talked about the data gaps and the analysis that needs to be put in place, but like a lot of these issues, I think they become more complicated than they need to be for various reasons. And what I was hearing from Zach's synopsis was sort of going back to that concept of, let's do what we need to do. Let's submit a solid plan. Let's, follow, administer that plan to the best of our abilities, et cetera, et cetera. But the other thing, and this, again, we'll see what happens, but, part of the frustration, I think, at least on my perspective with Sigma, is that we can submit this amazing plan to DWR premised on the feedback that we know of. And I think, Dominic, they have up to 3 years, I think. Isn't that the current stipulation? Maybe longer to get complete feedback of that plan. So, that's the other thing to consider too, is that, we might be going down the road for several years and then have to change course. I'm hoping that's not the case, but that has definitely been one of the concerns I've had, with the process of Sigma and how to move forward. So if Dominic maybe can address that at some point, that would be good. And then to Glenn's point, Glenn, we don't want to see $2,000 per acre foot. I mean, I know you know that, but that has not been a benefit to San Diego County agriculture. So yes, I think that folks are looking at the variables that are out there right now. But again, let's look at what we need to focus on and how to keep the price points, as achievable as possible. I don't want to see $2,000 per acre foot water in Mendocino County. I don't think that's going to be, something that we can sustain, our agricultural basis on. So that's where I agree with Zach and sort of looking at keeping this process, let's administer it, let's do it correctly, but let's not make it a bigger grill in the room than it needs to be. I
agree. So Dominic, do you have anything to add to our conversation right now?
Yeah, just to answer your question. So under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we have 2 years to complete our review, a maximum. And our goal is to get out reviews as quickly as possible. And I think you'll see that we did put out a few letters, not that weren't reviews, but we're kind of giving basins a heads up on things if there was issues that we would want them to change. Because, once we complete our review, there's actually a statute, I think it's 180 days that a basin has to comply. And so we're trying to kind of give more lead time even in those cases. But yeah, it would be a maximum of 2 years with the goal of completing the review as fast as is feasibly possible. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you for that. I couldn't remember the exact time frame.
Michael.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that at the very least, we need to be collecting these data. And to do so is going to require meetings for approvals and for budget, things like that. They probably don't have to be made every month or so, but they're still going to have to be made. And as far as not worrying about our basin, I think if you were to ask that on the upper end of our basin, they're probably very much worried. And so it does, we need the data so we can make an intelligent decision, period. And that's about all I have to say.
Does anyone else care to comment on this before we leave this item on the agenda?
I have a brief comment. As one of the member agencies that will have to pony up, it's important to me that any grant writing that can be done that would cover costs that would otherwise fall on these member agencies is worth doing. And I would like to be as forceful as possible in stating that.
Deborah.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment on that as well, which is that the return on investment for the grant writing will probably be very high, and the money will probably most likely be available in the first 5 years. So I think there is some benefit to investing in that. So that's all.
Okay. Michael, do you have another comment, or is your hand still up?
Ouch, my hand's still up.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah,
so
Brooke, can I just pick on you for a second here? And so you're suggesting that you would like this board, the Sigma agency, to chase those grants instead of you guys?
I'm sorry, were you talking to, I didn't quite catch the beginning of what you said.
Yeah.
Were you asking me? Oh,
yeah, I am. I'm saying, so the choice here is who pursues the grants. So would you prefer that there's the Sigma agency, us here on this board, are hiring a grant writer to go ahead and try to secure money through these grants? Or is this something that you guys would like to do independently of us with our full support?
You know, I'm not going to state a preference for that either way. I do think if the GSA has some level of, what's the word, you know, direction in that helps grant writing, it makes it more effective and likely to be funded. So I'm not saying one way or another where, you know, whether it has to be us or it could be the water agency, but I do think some level of organization will help that process.
Thank you. So anything else, Zach, or does that answer your question?
Good conversation. I think we all need to keep exploring this issue, and at the next meeting, I'll step forward with some actual proposals specifically for budgets and RFPs to keep this conversation moving forward.
Okay.
Can I add one comment on the grants?
Yes.
The only eligible applicant is the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. That's how it typically works through DWR. They don't allow nonprofits to apply for that money unless they're going to change that. Now, there might be some other sources of grants that would allow others to do the applications, but you, at a minimum, you know, so if we wrote the grant, we would have to write it for the agency. So there's all these questions of, you know, how does that get funded? Because we wouldn't get any money out of it. I don't think my board's going to let us for free write grants for other people. Now, Zach, I did look into whether the DOC grant could cover writing a proposal, and they said, yes, if you change a few other things. So there's a possibility we can do one for the group. But I think you have to take that stuff into account, is who is required to be the lead agency and the contract administrator. And how does that work with everybody else? And then, you know, we can all just talk about it and see what will work best.
That's well said, Laurel. Thank you.
And if I can inject, the it's incumbent upon us to have a method of being aware of what grants may be available and communicating between GSA and the other members of the community that it serves, so that when something pops up, then it can be sorted through as to who should apply for it.
Well, we do have a community.
Being aware of them, somebody or somebody's has to do that, and they have to be communicated to other affected persons, bodies, decision makers in a timely fashion.
Yes, I agree. And, we do have a community. It's one thing that's really wonderful about Mendocino County. We have a surprisingly robust community of people interested in water. A lot of you are here on this Zoom call today. And again, as long as we have a stable home and a place to reach people, such as placing the GSA within Mendocino County and hopefully a Mendocino County water agency that deals with all things water, that'll help a lot to have some stability. Dominic, you want to weigh in on something?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify one thing. So if, like resource conservation districts, nonprofits, tribes, there's a couple other examples, they actually can apply for the grant. There's only one applicant per basin, and they cannot do so without a letter of support from the GSA stating that they're wanting whoever it is to apply for that grant on their behalf.
Okay. Good. Other questions or comments? So kind of summarizing this discussion a little bit is what I'm hearing from the group is that we don't see any reason to have a regular, really frequent meetings. We see the purpose for regular meetings. We feel that a lot of the really hard work and heavy lifting is done since we've been working with our consultant to create the plan and to create the organization. Our next phase is to come up with stable funding. And we feel like we should be working maybe with partner organizations who have research interests, give the opportunity to work with them if they require our presence as the grant, the entity applying for the grant, but we don't at this point see or hope that we need to be very active in management or anything that would require us to be having frequent meetings. And we kind of favor more or less a minimalist approach. And, I fully support that. Does anyone feel that we need to take any other action at this time? Okay, if not, then I think that we can move on to the next item, which is item E, is discussion and approval of budget adjustment for immediate additional groundwater monitoring and authorization for staff to expend funds for said monitoring with funding from additional member contributions. Okay, so who is leading this discussion?
I can start. So we believe that there's benefit in doing additional monitorings in the next 5 to 6 months to determine the effects of this drought on the groundwater in the basin. And if we begin our monitoring come January after hopefully it's rained, we'll miss this opportunity. So this item is requesting that the board discuss and possibly authorize additional monitoring this fall, which would be monthly monitoring of a subset of wells at the approximate cost of $16,000, and that would need to be funded through an immediate commitment for member contributions of approximately $4,000 per member agency.
Sounds like the letter to the agencies is going to be two parts. One, to ask about these funds, because we need a commitment for these funds, and also about the funding for the overall budget. So might as well ask that question in the same letter. That's my thought.
Anyone else care to weigh in?
Amber, where did this idea come from?
I think this initially was brought up by Laura, I think. Amir, do you know if that's correct?
Oh, sorry, I was unmuted. Yes, we brought up this during the last TAG meeting, and this is basically based on a feedback that we got from Sonoma and talking to other stakeholders, and also just going by the data that we have and missing the last drought. The groundwater elevation data that we have is basically starting 2014, 2015, which is towards the end of last drought. So it would be very worthwhile to capture at least this drought to see what happens to the groundwater basin when the resources are low. So we suggested it. I think TAC was overly on board, and this is a suggestion that came out of it.
Well, it certainly seems logical to me. We're experiencing what we hope is a not very frequent but very dramatic event, and having data on kind of a worst case scenario is something that I think is useful.
Amir, what do you mean that we missed the last drought, though? And you're saying we would not have any data on this drought? We're actively monitoring right now. So what would we be missing if we don't spend this money?
We're currently only monitoring 2 times per year. So we would only get 1 reading this fall as opposed to 1 every month.
And how far back does that monitoring go, Amber?
Amir, you may know better than I do the answer to
that. CASGEM started in 2014.
Okay, so that's
there
are,
2014. There are some wells that go back far.
Laurel, you're out there doing a ton of CLSI continuous monitoring, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. We have continuous monitoring transducers in 4 wells right now. And they're hopefully clicking away, although they might be in the air instead of in the water. I'm not sure this year, but that would be an indicator in and of itself. And we we check them more often than twice a year and do put the tape, that's the way CASGEM does it. They take the tape that makes a noise when it hits water. So that's your QA/QC for continuous monitoring. So we have measurements, yeah. So, I mean, it may be that Laura had in mind other locations because we don't have everywhere. More locations the merrier for monitoring.
Is there any additional monitoring that could take place under the current grant that you have for this fall?
The only new installations we're doing are the 2 Sigma gauges under that grant. But we will keep all these well gauges in as well. So, and didn't Zach, they put one in on your well, right? Didn't they put a permanent transducer into Garzini?
Oh yeah, I mean, we're all magnetic here. We got so many transducers broadcasting right and left.
Yeah, so because we started that one and then it went over to the Sigma one, and I think there's a couple others that did that too. So it's partly us and it's partly who's ever taking care of those other gauges. And I don't know who that is right now.
That's RCD through CASGEM.
Okay. So those are continuous. That's not just a CASGEM reading, right?
Now you got me wondering.
Well, CASGEM doesn't use instruments, right? It wouldn't have an instrument in the well. It would just be a measurement twice a year when Deborah comes by. least I think that's true. Maybe she could tell us.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I go by twice a year, usually April and October. And just as you were saying, I do a physical measurement with a monitoring tape. And there are a couple wells that have the automatic readers on them, and I get the data either from Laurel, or the city of Ukiah. But the vast majority it's a physical measurement. But it's only 2 readings a year.
Okay, so I'm a little bit confused, Amber, on this request. So we have monitor going on. Is there a proposed budget for all this and work plan?
Yeah, we did receive an estimate. We asked Resource Conservation District to give us an estimate, and they gave us an estimate of, I think initially, this happened a while ago, so they initially gave us an estimate for 6 months. So what I put in here was actually only for 5 months. So it depends on how long it would take us to get this going. So it may end up even being maybe only 4 months if it takes a while to get the commitment. So, this is by no means required. It's just a chance for us to get additional data that we don't have.
A thought, if this body says approves this subject to the approval of the other 4 of the member bodies, the funding bodies, then if one of them has a concern and says we're not going to contribute the money, then this group is confronted with, okay, then where does the money come from, or do we not do it? But Sean White is away. I certainly would ask him his thoughts about what information we don't have that we should spend money for. And that would inform me about how I would vote in city council. But in order to set this up so it could occur, if the action was approve it subject to, then I could support this today.
Would you like to make a motion to that effect?
Consider my remarks a motion.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. I can second that. I also have a comment I'd like to make.
Okay. I'll go ahead and make your comment right now, and then we'll go to Deborah.
Okay. The impetus for this came from Laura and Amir and their intimate knowledge of what information we need and what is done with that information and how valuable it is or not. And, I have faith in God, but all others bring data. And this is a case where people that know more than I do and people who are well aware and have been supportive of our effort to keep it simple and not do any more than we have to do. If they've brought this forward as this would be a good thing to do, and we're looking at, compared to some of the numbers that have been bouncing around, a relatively small number for a relatively large amount of data. I find it hard to believe that they're asking for data that's duplicative, but it would be good to hear from them that having Amir is here and has heard what other stuff is available, and if any of that is stuff he didn't know about, maybe that changes the analysis. But I would like to do this because I'm all about the data.
Hey, Deborah.
Al, I think Al's correct here. I want to signal my support. I'd like to see the contract that's time and materials with a not to exceed clause.
Okay.
Accept that.
Okay, so that's been accepted to our proposal on the floor. Deborah, do you want to weigh in? Do you have something to add?
Do you accept that?
Yeah, I do want to mention that this is all contingent on getting the permission of the well owners, because at the moment, we only have permission to do this twice a year. So I expect that most, if not all, of the people in the subset of wells that would be monitored will be fine with it. But I just want to make sure that that's clear, that until I, get that approval, I won't know for sure.
Okay. All right, so there's a motion on the floor basically to consider doing this extra monitoring with the thought that we would move ahead. Perhaps someone should read it back so that, Amber, have you caught the motion?
Yeah, so the recommended action is to approve the budget adjustment for immediate additional groundwater monitoring and authorize staff to expend funds for said monitoring with funding from additional member contributions. So we could just change that to subject to funding with funding from additional member contributions. I did talk in the agenda item about it being also subject to member or to landowner permissions. We could also put that into the action, although it would take us authorizing RCD to start this work in order for them to find out if landowners are willing.
Seems to me like knowing the dollars are available and the members agree to do it before causing anybody to spend effort that they would have an on with this body for.
Yeah, the only issue there is that in order for RCD to obtain that landowner permission, they would have to expend money. So we would need to authorize at least that portion of the work in order for them to find out if that's the case.
Is that $10 or what is that?
Deborah?
That's a good guess. I mean, a good question. I don't expect it would be a lot. It just depends on how many questions they have. If I don't know. It will be more than $10 and less than 1,000. I'm not sure. It really depends on how extensive the conversations need to be.
Would it be sufficient? Go ahead, Amber.
I was going to say, do you think that there's budget to do that under the current CASGEM monitoring to do your initial outreach? Maybe not finalizing the agreements, but at least to get landowner buy-in to move forward.
I could at least start the conversations and get a sense of the direction. And if it looks like it's needing more, then I can come back to you. But yeah, I think I can at least get the conversation started and get read the crowd and see how it's looking.
That sounds good.
My thought is if 3 or 4 of these landowners say no, which I'd be surprised, but let's assume that it still doesn't matter. We want to move forward. I would at least like us to see you moving forward with that. And so it doesn't matter to me if a couple people drop out.
True.
Okay.
Not all or nothing. That's true.
Yeah. Beth, you have a question?
I do. So am I hearing that there's general consensus from the board members that that they will recommend approving this to their own entities? Did I catch that? Okay, assuming that that's a consent, yes, everyone did. And the total amount for the entire period is $16,000. Is that right, Amber?
Not to exceed.
Okay, well, yeah. And in order, so the recommendation is to take this back to the individual entity boards and get approval. How long is that going to take before then we come back and finally RCD is able to move forward? I think it might be an extensive amount of time. And as the general manager of the Russian River Flood Control District, I have authorization to spend up to $15,000. So, with Al's nod and consent on that as our board member representative, I would be willing to work on something where the Flood Control District could make a more immediate contribution and get this moving. We don't have time to waste. That's the whole point. I actually tried to hire RCD directly to start this when it first was brought up, but because of the and Deborah could speak to this more, but because of the contract with CASGIM, or I'm not exactly sure, but it had to come through the GSA. But perhaps if Al gives the nod and that seems like something that's doable, that might be a way to get this implemented faster. Make it worthy.
In answer to your question regarding Ukiah, we have a council meeting next week. The agenda is already published. So unless this was somehow put on the agenda as an emergency item, it would be the first meeting of next month, which would be the first Wednesday. It may fall under the city manager's authority to make an expenditure of this nature, but I can't speak to that as being so, or what the willingness would be there.
And Amber, in the case of Mendocino County, this would probably go on the consent agenda, and as soon as that could happen is probably the end of the month, right? About August 31st.
Yeah, it usually takes about a month to get something on the agenda. In terms of a $4,000 expenditure, that's well within a department's authority. Our issue here, our issue is that the water agency budget is so tight that I don't know that we may need to ask for an additional $4,000 as opposed to just using water agency funds. So that's something that I can explore if there's any way to come up with that, because it doesn't technically need board approval for that amount. So I'll have to explore that more. But if it needs to go to the board, it takes about a month, 3 to 4 weeks.
Work closely with me on that and we'll see what we can do. Okay, so I guess we have a motion on the floor. So is it time for us to call for a vote?
I'm sorry, could we just clarify the motion a little more, just because there was Amber kind of repeating it, but before that there was the not to exceed amount written that was also thrown in there. I just want to make sure it's all coming together. Amber, would you mind repeating what you had with the not to exceed amount language built in there somewhere? I want to make sure.
So I would say approve budget adjustment for immediate additional groundwater monitoring and authorize staff to expend funds up to but not exceeding $16,000 for said monitoring, subject to funding from additional member contributions. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
Yes.
I would suggest that it be approval of funding so that it's clear that they have to approve it. It seems ambiguous to say, I stopped.
So subject to approval of funding from additional member contributions, or subject to approval of additional member contributions.
Well, it's approval by the members of those contributions. So each member needs to approve this to do the additional funding is where I think we are.
Yes. You got that, Nicole?
Yeah.
So
and just to clarify, the maker of the motion and the second approve that language.
Yes.
Sounds like
second, I'm approving that.
Okay, thank you very much.
I want to say the point that the proposal that Beth made. Obviously, it's going to take at least a month, and the whole point of this thing was to be collecting data. It seems to me that she is authorized to expend money, and our contribution would be $4,000, which would be 25% of the maximum that it would take to do this thing. And it would certainly be enough to get it started. So, we could basically put that in the pot so that things can start. trusting that the other members would see the value in it as they have expressed here and be able to bring forward their portion. Worst case scenario, it gets 25% down the road and then it dies. But at least you got that much in the can at that point. So I think she's certainly is capable of putting that 4,000 in there if that's her desire.
Okay, so are we ready to call for the question? Yes. Okay, so Nicole?
Chair McGorty?
Yes.
Chair Crane?
Aye.
Or I'm sorry, Dr. Crane. Thank you. Director White?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Dr. Navarez is absent. Director LaRue? We still have Director LaRue?
Doesn't look like it. Oh, wait, no, Ross.
I see you.
Ross, there he is. Okay.
There he is. We have a vote from Director LaRue.
He's muted.
A second, I guess.
Ross, can you unmute yourself?
Do we have enough votes with him being absent?
We do. We could mark him as abstaining or absent. I'm not quite sure what the proper protocol is, just because it looks like he is still signed into the meeting.
Unresponsive.
Unresponsive. Just through the chair, how would you like to handle this?
I think that we can, if we have enough votes to pass the motion, we'll pass it and just say that, no response. Okay. So it doesn't look like he was here, but he unfortunately technologically couldn't vote.
Okay, I can put that into the motion. The motion carries with Director Navarez absent and Director LaRue not responsive due to technological difficulties.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. Next, we have director's reports. Would anybody care to make a report?
None here.
None.
I have a brief one when it's appropriate.
Go ahead, Zach.
Really, I'd like to ask two open questions to Amir. In reading through the draft chapters, I was paying attention to triggers and to measurable objectives. So first question, Amir, I'm wondering if I read it correctly that we're stating as part of our plan that our measurable objective with regard to groundwater elevations is that we are going to increase the elevations in our basin to the 70th percentile of what we've seen historically. In other words, we're going to put more water in our basin than was historically here. Did I read something incorrectly, or are we saying that?
We are not saying that. At least we are not trying to say that. So I think I can go back and clarify if that's something that is interpreted from it. I did see your comment. What we're saying is basically twofold. So it's either average or 75th percentile. And the reason is we have some monitoring wells that have a longer historical data. For those, we're going for the average. So we're trying to get to the average as the measurable objective, average of the historical period. And for the ones that we define not covering the last drought period, which basically includes most of the calcium wells because they don't cover the last drought period. We are shooting for 75th percentile of that period of record, basically 2014 to 2018 to 19. And the reason is most of that, like the 75th percentile means like a deeper, so it gives more flexibility, not less. And the reason is we want to avoid setting measurable objective to the drought levels, basically focusing more on the 2016 and after that we had a more normal year.
That's awesome. Thank you. My second question has to do with triggers. Those, if I'm correct, are measurements that were outside the bounds that we defined as acceptable. Still not, well, actually, a trigger, correct me if I'm wrong, just means we need to start paying attention, but it is a regulatory event when we hit a trigger. Is that correct? It triggers a regulatory event?
Trigger is not a legal requirement. I can say that. So basically, trigger is just for the GSA to notice a significant change and be prepared that the basin might be going towards a minimum threshold, which is a legal requirement or a legal subject, basically. So a trigger doesn't provide any regulatory burden on the GSA. It's just something that we define so the GSA can get a notice. So if a trigger is hit, it means that we are, based on historical record, we're going towards imperfect path. So we may need to prepare and do some things not to, fall into a minimum threshold criteria.
Super. We'll continue this offline then. I noticed that some of our triggers look like they were set at a position where we're going to hit them on the first year. And I just want to make sure that that's not the case. So more to talk about offline.
Yeah, we can discuss offline. And that, I don't think that's the case. I can show you the data that those would not happen the first year.
Thank you.
Amir?
Yes.
Something I've spoken to from pretty early on. This basin hasn't been heavily drawn. We're not the same sort of beast as the problems they have in the Central Valley. The amount of water that's below us, the formation that's below us, could be drawn down much more, and it's not the sort of soil that is so likely to subside. Having this water below us and not being able to use it or go into a warning mode based upon an arbitrary 2015 date or whatever is a real challenge. Everything, in my opinion, everything must be done to get us the ability, restore the ability, whatever, to draw down more water. And I do not believe that it constitutes a problem. But that date and the ability to expand the use to something that's, in my view, more reasonable is something that we should be mindful of trying to achieve. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Crane. Yes, we never, at least in this version of the draft that is going for public review, we are not using 2015 for any of the minimum thresholds, but we are using, because that's the record of data that we have. So we are either using the 3 lowest historical data points if you have a longer record, or we are using the lowest point. So that lowest point might translate to 2014 or 15 because that's the data we have. But basically, we have this regulatory bound that we need to follow and justify what we put in. But we tried, based on your comments and the comments in the tag from multiple stakeholders, to try to provide a flexibility to be able to pump when it's needed, while also maintaining other requirements that SIGMA requires us to actually do. So the pumping also, as we discussed heavily during the tag, so that we have these projects and management actions. So it really depends where you're pumping and how deep you're pumping. So it's not, one size fit all for the whole basin. So those are the things that we can figure out during the implementation and during the projects and management actions. But we try to build as much flexibility as we could in these minimum thresholds So when it's needed, there is water available to pump.
Amir, to alleviate Director Crane's concerns, isn't it true that we can modify our plan as time goes by, like the 5-year update, as we collect more and more data and have a better and better picture of what's going on? If it appears that we've set thresholds improperly, or we can justify setting them otherwise, that we could do that? Is that true?
100%, yes. And we try to put that language multiple occasions that just relying on the heavy data gap that sometimes we have. We need to actually do that. That's the best way. And our plan is adaptive, and adaptive management is in the Sigma language. But for our basin, for Ukiah, it needs to be even more emphasized because we have data gaps. So as we get more data, we can, in each 5 year, we can actually change the basin if it's appropriate.
Good. I think that would cover us.
Yes.
Any other director reports? I'll give just a brief one. So at the Board of Supervisors, we have an ad hoc drought committee. We're working hard to come up with a method for moving emergency supplies of water, which is way more complicated than I ever thought possible. By the time we clear it with all agencies and enter into agreements with mutual aid agreements with the City of Ukiah and City of Fort Bragg, and potentially also Willits and Point Arena to cover all of our bases. It's going to take a little bit more time, but there's a lot of concern on the coast of wells running out, particularly in Mendocino. And more importantly is also with the hotel industry and hospitality industry there, because that, of course, is the whole basis of the economy. So we also need to work with that industry to keep them going, which is really disappointing because they're really experiencing a nice recovery. There's a good flow of TOT money coming in, so we don't want to blow it on that. So, we're lucky we have groundwater to manage. I guess is the point I'm trying to make, because they don't on the coast, and it's really a crisis for them. And long term, they're going to have to come up with some better solutions. So that's just I just wanted to share that with you, because I know you are aware of the issues. We keep hitting the newspapers as one of the icons of California. Mendocino is a special little place, the town, and it's being noticed internationally. There was an article in The Guardian about this. So we're making a lot of press on that. So I feel obligated as a supervisor to try to help. So that's where we're at. With that, the last item is just any additional non-agenda item comments from our public. Does anyone have anything they want to add or say? Well, thank you all. The meeting was a little bit longer than I anticipated, so thank you for sticking in.
I think Elizabeth.
Michael?
I think Elizabeth wanted to, or Beth wanted to.
Oh, Elizabeth, I'm sorry.
Dominic and I both have our hands
up.
Okay,
sorry.
Michael, if you could put up on the screen that flyer, in order to support the residents and businesses in conservation measures, our CD and the county have cooperated with the DWR, I believe, in getting some funding to do another drought drop-by. This one will be held Saturday, August 21st at 8 a.m. to noon at Lucky's Supermarket on Perkins Street. We're still looking for a few volunteers if you'd like to come out for part or all of that time and help put the buckets together and pass them out to the community. And please pass this flyer on to your constituents, friends, coworkers, etc. Let's get these supplies out there and help people conserve, please.
Thank you, Beth. Sorry, no disrespect meant. I just didn't see you.
No worries. Dominic's got his hand up too.
Okay, Dominic.
Yeah, I just wanted to provide a clarification. It was a bit back. I talked to my supervisor, and she confirmed that there had been no change to the current round of implementation. The proposal solicitation package is final, but the legislature did approve $60 million in local assistance funding for Sigma. And then they're slated to approve, well, potentially will approve another $300 million And those requirements may be different, but those requirements haven't been created yet. And as soon as they are, we will send those out so that you have them. So I just wanted to provide you that update.
Thank you. That's a very quick turnaround. All right. Well, with that in mind, if there's no further comments, and I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you at the next meeting.
All right.